Socrates is said to have said that the unexamined life is not worth living. But what does it mean to examine one's life, especially in modern times? The Undiscovered Self was an essay written by the psychoanalyst Carl Jung either in 1957 or 1958. My book won't seem to tell me when. But what is certain is that this was after Jung went through World War I, World War II, and was now currently living during the Cold War, where the threat of nuclear annihilation lingered about. It was under this context that Jung wrote this essay. You see, one of the goals of this work was to encourage self-knowledge, as he calls it, as one option, or to have a personal religious experience, which is kinda something outside of your control, so really the self-knowledge part is what we're going to focus on. Jung saw this self-knowledge as a way to possibly prevent more of these mass human atrocities that he's witnessed in his life. Resistance to the organized mass can be affected only by the man who is as well organized in his individuality as the mass itself. But let's take a step back and look more at the problem that Jung sees that's leading to these mass human atrocities. Jung believed that as human knowledge expands, we've begun to look at people not as individuals, but in a more statistical framework. You're no longer a unique individual, but rather a representative of this or that group, or simply erased in favor of a statistical average. After all, it's politically and socially more convenient to talk in groups rather than individuals. We are all fascinated and overawed by statistical truths and large numbers, and are daily apprised of the nullity and futility of the individual personality. What results is that as we lose sight of the individual, we shift our ideals to higher powers such as the state. I personally wish Jung wrote a bit more about this shift, but it does make intuitive sense that when we see groups as opposed to individualized humans, we look to those groups that have power and influence in order to construct our reality for us. The saddest aspect of this shift from individual to state is that our individual moral perspectives are now suppressed and replaced by the views of the state. The moral responsibility of the individual is then inevitably replaced by the policy of the state. This disappearance of the individual and its replacement with groups and organizations like the state is referred to as mass-mindedness by Jung. You may not be 100% on board, but there's a very clear example from history that Jung himself witnessed that shows how this plays out: the Holocaust. Instead of viewing the Jewish people as individuals with their own lives, goals, and families, the Nazis shifted this individualized perspective into group perspective, labeling them with whatever horrible things they could think of to sway the German populace. And then, with this mass-mindedness established, perhaps it was easier for the policy of the state to become the morality of the populace, regardless of how horrifying those policies were. So that's the analysis of the problem here that Jung recognizes, this mass-mindedness. Before we get to self-knowledge as an antidote, I want to briefly touch on the other antidote mentioned throughout this work: religion. Many political movements have always tried to control religion or reduce it. One only has to think of the famous quote by Marx. Jung believes this is because an individual religious experience with something otherworldly reduces the investment one has in this world and its policies. It's not ethical principle, however lofty, or creeds, however orthodox, that lay the foundation for the freedom and autonomy of the individual, but the incontrovertible experience of an intensely personal, reciprocal relationship between man and an extra-mundane authority. Now, it's important to differentiate religion, as Jung is using it, and creeds. Creeds are those collective beliefs generated by religion, which is more of a social matter than a religious matter to Jung. Having a one-on-one experience with God is much more in the realm of religion than going to church and following whatever your church says you should do, which is more of a social function. So it's easy to see how creeds can be a form of this mass-mindedness, but with religion, for Jung, it's much more individualized and is thus an adequate escape. But many of you may not be interested in this religious aspect, so we'll move on to the issue of self-knowledge. Let's start by discussing what self-knowledge is not for Jung. Self-knowledge is not a statistical or scientific investigation of human averages. It needs to be individual and personal. So opening up a biology or sociology textbook is not a good gateway to self-knowledge. Next, it's not simply conscious knowledge since it's just surface level, and also highly susceptible to outside influence. Modern man knows himself only insofar as he can become conscious of himself, a capacity largely dependent on environmental conditions. So what then is self-knowledge? Let me start this section off with a quick disclaimer that I'm still fairly new to psychoanalysis and psychology, but to the best of my knowledge, this is what Jung is saying. In a general sense, self-knowledge is knowledge of our unconscious mind, more specifically, Jung makes many references to our shadow. What is the shadow? In a very basic sense, it's this figure in our unconscious mind, representing repressed but often negative values. Because we associate this shadow of ours with these bad vibes, we tend to ignore it or repress it. Throughout this essay, the shadow is referred to as something evil, and although we try to repress this evil inside of us, it naturally shows itself in all these abominable acts of evil. But if one can no longer avoid the realization that evil, without man's ever having chosen it, is lodged in human nature itself, then it bestrides the psychological stage as the equal and opposite partner of good. Now, since we only really recognize our conscious mind, we naturally believe, or maybe want to believe, that we aren't evil. We're good people. We would never hurt anyone, and every day we wake up excited to be exclusively and solely selfless. And all the evil things that do happen in the world, well, those are just other people, not me. I'm a totally 100% moral person. Since it is universally believed that man is merely what his consciousness knows of himself, he regards himself as harmless. He does not deny that terrible things have happened, but it is always the others who do them. In sum, self-knowledge seems to be the recognition of our unconscious, specifically our shadow, and coming to terms with it, and as a result, being more prepared to confront and possibly reduce evil in society and yourself. It's accepting the fact that evil resides in us, rather than burying our heads in the sand while human atrocities take place. Recognition of the shadow leads to the modesty we need in order to acknowledge imperfections. So how do we practically achieve self-knowledge and recognize our shadow? Well, that's kind of the tough part. Jung doesn't seem to give step-by-step instructions. Probably because general advice might go against his more individualized perspective on humanity. But it seems like he points towards an approach involving psychology and psychoanalysis. Perhaps this means taking the time to see a psychotherapist who will treat you as an individual patient rather than another medical case to be solved with general medical advice. I'm not 100% sure of this, but this is what I'm reading between the lines, I guess. Again, I am new to psychoanalysis, so feel free to share your insights below in the comments section. I also put out a Freud video last week, which really didn't do so hot for some reason despite such a big name. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button below. And I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.